I have been so excited to create and play with the new Fresh Air collection from Simple Stories. As always, there are so many exciting and really cute papers and embellishments. I really wanted to use a lot of those pattern papers, so I decided to create a slanted square background that showcases several of the papers and colors. To start, I'm cutting out 2-inch squares from a variety of the papers. This design could work with several different sizes of squares. You could go smaller or larger depending on how detailed you would want this design to be. I feel like 2 inches was the perfect size for what I had in mind. I'm going to arrange these squares slanted so they become a diamond shape. Anytime I am creating a detailed pattern like this, I always start in the middle of my layout. So I'm going to start with a half diamond right in the middle on the right edge of my layout and then build out from that. And this ensures that the pattern I'm creating is centered between the top and bottom edges of the layout. I'm also distressing the edge of each diamond. I love the dimension it adds and how it helps really define the edges of each square. Plus, when grouping pieces together like this, the rough edge gives you a little wiggle room with the arrangement. It's easier to hide imperfect arrangement with that rough edge. I'm only going to build this pattern to about the halfway point of the layout. I love balancing a busy design with lots of white space, and so I like the idea of half of the layout being super busy and then the other half is simple and clean. I was unsure if I wanted to include papers with the words on them since the pieces are slanted, but I really loved the dark blue text paper, so I went ahead with it. Eventually, though, it just wasn't working for me, so I removed those two pieces and replaced them with the dark blue floral paper instead. After I have the area covered that I want, I am trimming off the pieces that hang over the edges, and then I'm filling in the little teeny tiny pieces at the top and bottom edges so I don't have white holes there. I know that I want to add hand stitching on the slanted squares, so I'm using my OmniGrid ruler and a pencil to draw lines about 1/8 of an inch from the edges. And I'm not doing every single edge, but enough that it will have stitching throughout the design. With these pencil lines drawn, I'm going to go ahead and add my photo and one of the 3x4-inch cutout cards. I want to get these larger pieces down first before I start piercing the holes for stitching. There's no use in stitching in that area since it's going to be covered anyway, so it's easier to just go ahead and add those pieces. Next, I use a foam mat behind my layout and pierce holes with a paper piercer. I typically aim for my holes being somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. The difficult part with this design is that the lines are going all the way to the edges. Now, usually this isn't difficult with a straight line. You can just wrap the thread around the edge. But with this design, because the lines I am stitching are slanted, you can't just wrap the thread at the end of the layout because it won't stay in that slanted position. So what I like to do is pierce a hole right on the edge of the paper, creating a little notch that will hold the thread in that position. You can also use scissors and just snip a little slit on the edge, and then that will hold your thread. After the holes are pierced, I use an eraser to erase all of those pencil lines. That's not always necessary, but I'm using white thread and don't want any of that pencil lead to transfer to my thread and get it dirty. For the stitching, I'm using 3 strands of embroidery floss. That is always my recommendation. If you find when you stitch that you struggle with pulling the thread through the holes, or you often wrinkle or warp your paper when you stitch, you might try using 3 strands. It makes a huge difference in how easily it pulls through the holes, and in turn, you won't wrinkle or warp your paper. If the thread is harder to pull through, we typically will grip the paper tighter, and that's where the wrinkling happens. And using 3 strands doesn't really make a huge difference in the appearance of the stitching. So I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it yet. So I'm stitching using a back stitch. That is my go-to stitch. It's really easy and produces a beautiful continuous line of stitching. To do it, you just go up the next available hole and then back down the one behind it, and then up the next available hole and back down the one behind it. It's moving forward under the paper and then moving backwards above the paper. With the stitching done, next I add my title. I am using this large sunshine die cut from the Fresh Air page pieces. And I love this font and the floral design on top of it, and it is used throughout this collection. I'm also adding a die cut flower to the corner. I know I want to create a cluster here, and this flower, I wanted to get it down before that title is adhered. I really loved the idea of adding some sort of popped up detail on each slanted square, so I decided to go with butterflies. This collection has so many cute ones, along with some dragonflies and moths. And I'm going to use both die cuts and ones cut from one of the pattern papers. I used foam adhesive to adhere them so they really stand out from the busier background. On the edge pieces, I try my best to center the butterfly, and then I can trim off any that is hanging over the edges. Now I'm going to start building that flower cluster around the title and that 3x4" card. I always love the variety of elements we get with Simple Stories collections, and there are so many great pieces that I can use to create this cluster. I'm also going to add some more pieces to the title. Lately, I've been in a phase where I like to layer lots of phrases together for my titles. I'm using some phrase stickers and the Lovely Days die cut piece. Next, I add my journaling just above the photo, and I'm going to finish out the small details of the layout. A little tradition I have with cameras on a layout is I always add a little heart to the lens, since as a scrapbooker, so much love comes through that camera. I'm also going to add some of the Fresh Air enamel dots to the flower cluster. And the video does not do these justice. They are so beautiful and glittery, which I absolutely love. And that completes my layout. I hope you enjoyed watching my process and seeing this beautiful Simple Stories collection in action. Thank you so much for watching.